Most credible predictions your power bill will rise at least 35% next year make a mockery of the Prime Minister's pre-election promise to bring your bills down by $275 a year over this term of Parliament. In the past 24 hours, the head of Alinta Energy said that gas shortages, extra transmission costs and the early closure of coal-fired power stations meant the prices would go up 35% next year on top of the current 20% increase this year. These are CEO Jeff Dimery's exact words. Next year, he says, using the current market prices, tariffs are going up by a minimum of 35%. A 35% increase is horrendous, it's unpalatable, he says, but that's the reality of where we are headed, unfortunately, and I don't have a solution. When he spoke with my colleague a little earlier today, the Alinta CEO went further.
If you take all of the available information off, for instance, the future price of electricity, the price of network charges and the like, and we feed that through, it's a visible process, then that's what answer falls out the back end of that. So that's not a number that I've made up. The cost of the transition is going to be, for a raft of reasons, more expensive than it otherwise would have been a few years ago. Telling people that they're going to get a reduction, really, we're not in a position to make those sort of promises anymore. If we close assets before new assets are due to come online, that is going to force pricing higher and higher. And I don't think the Australian consumers can afford that.
Other energy companies had similar estimates to Alinta's predicted 35% hike. Those orders of magnitude sound familiar to me, said Chief of Origin Energy. And the Energy Australia boss pointed out that wholesale power prices have already quadrupled in the past year. Quadrupled. Now, this is the inevitable and unavoidable result of running our power grid to reduce emissions rather than do what objectively they used to be, there to produce affordable and reliable power for all Australians. The problem with renewable power is that it's intermittent. You can't rely on it. It always requires a fallback when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, because we want and need power 24/7. Renewables, of course, feel good option, sure, as long as they don't constitute more than about 20% of our total power generation. But that's not where we're headed. And the experience of every single country that's gone down the path of replacing affordable, reliable power from coal and gas with power that depends on the weather is that prices go through the roof and heavy industry migrates to countries that don't let green dreams trump economic self-interest or the energy security of their people. To achieve Labor's now legislated 43% cut in emissions, let alone the even more ambitious targets of many of the states, renewables will have to expand from about 30% to 80% of all power generation, and coal shrink from what we use today, about 60%, to down 10% in just 8 years. And as well as building new wind and solar farms at breakneck speed, we'll have to spend around $80 billion on new transmission infrastructure, again, in just 8 years, for a decentralised grid that'll only generate power on average 30% of the time. Yesterday, the CEO of Transgrid said a 1-year slippage in these transmission timelines would also hike our power bills, on top of everything else, by more than $300 a year. Everyone in the business of generating and supplying power knows this headlong rush to decarbonise is next to impossible or prohibitively expensive, yet no one's prepared to call out this madness lest they offend the climate cult. So instead, they warn of price hikes to come and the possibility, to quote, of disorderly transition if coal-fired power exits too soon, without actually saying that renewables without backup, without real baseload, it's a crock if we're going to keep lights on and retain an energy-intensive manufacturing base and jobs in this country. It's still very early days for this new government, sure, but already its pre-election promises to cut our power bills, to boost wages and to keep the promised tax cuts in place are all but certain to be broken. not in the mini budget in 2 weeks' time, the real budget next year. Now, all of this should give the coalition a real chance of being competitive, provided it can be a credible alternative rather than just a weak echo. Imagine the politics tonight if the Libs and Labor had not signed up to Scott Morrison's net zero madness, because this is those net zero chickens coming home to roost.